Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Anyway, right. My name's Jef. I'm Sydney chapter lead for the Australian Psychedelic Society. We met Paul at an Australian Psychedelic Society picnic in Wollongong. I think before the first one, over a year ago, and he was quite excited to have us take part in the event and asked if I'd do a talk. Yeah, psychedelics and death. I think I can definitely find a few intersections and overlaps there. And so that's basically the aim and objective of the Psychedelic Society in Australia is to join community, have events so that people can come together and meet each other.
Yeah, Psychedelics.
Yeah.
In the TGA, which is the medicine organisation of the Australian government, in 2023 said that psilocybin, which is magic mushrooms, is a legally prescribable medicine. Similarly with MDMA, which is called ecstasy, it's prescribable by psychiatrists who can write prescriptions and they can give it to patients who really need it. Even though these medicines have been used for thousands of years in the underground as used for melancholy and lots of different things, it's just since then it's legitimised it, and we're just here to have conversations about it.
Thank you. So I did end up changing the title of this talk to something a little bit more apt and poetic. It's now called Through the Veil, Psychedelics and the Mystery of Death. Thank you everyone. It's an honour to speak to you today on this subject that's very near and dear to me. I think for one reason, and that is that psychedelics are one of the most reliable bridges between the experience of life and death. So the term, let's start with the term psychedelic was coined by Aldous Huxley in a conversation with Humphrey Osmond, and it essentially means to manifest the mind, from psyche and delic. They've also recently been called entheogens, which means to generate a sense of divinity from within. But to me, psyche is the goddess of the soul traditionally, so I think they're rather interchangeable, though I tend to just use psychedelics for the talks. So, the shared territory of psychedelics and dying begins with a striking observation. People who undergo powerful psychedelic experiences often describe them in language that mirrors the descriptions of near-death experiences, like feelings of leaving the body, travelling through tunnels of light, encountering deceased loved ones, and gaining profound insight into the nature of existence. They're common to both. In a now famous study on mystical experience conducted by Roland Griffith at Johns Hopkins in 2008, it was noted that psychedelics have long been associated with death and dying, although not necessarily the physical kind. Psychedelics induce a mystical type state which is commonly known as ego death or ego dissolution in the scientific literature, defined as the disappearance of an individual's sense of self or the removal of one's perception as an entity separate from the social and physical environment. In an experience of ego dissolution, our ordinary biographical sense of self sort of melts away and dissipates into a larger cosmic consciousness. So consider the words of a psilocybin study participant at Johns Hopkins University. It felt like I died, and then I saw myself from above, but I wasn't afraid. It was peaceful, like returning home. Now comparing that with testimony of someone who survived clinical death after cardiac arrest, I floated above my body, felt an overwhelming sense of love, and saw a light drawing me in. It was more real than anything I felt. So very, very similar. This overlap is not coincidental. Psychedelics such as psilocybin, DMT, and ayahuasca, they appear to activate the same neural and psychological pathways. I'm just out of order here, sorry. Okay. There we go. I'm sorry about this, people. So when death is near, the brain enters an unusual state of activity. Studies using EEGs have shown that a burst of gamma wave coherence moments after the heart stops, a possible final flush of conscious experience. The psychedelics similarly produce high-frequency synchronized brain activity. The scans reveal that typical patterns of brain function dissolve and regions that rarely talk to each other become hyper-connected. But in order for this to happen, the normal waking sense of self has to dissolve. Aldous Huxley called this the reducing valve, which has now been vindicated by science as the default mode network, a series of brain regions that act together to reduce and filter the bombardment of sensory information that we're constantly receiving from the external world. So it's now been shown through these studies that psychedelics attenuate this network in the manner of turning off the reducing valve. This is often described as ego death, or temporary letting go of the personal self, which mirrors what many religious and philosophical traditions have described as a prerequisite for a good death. As Eckhart Tolle expressed, the secret of life is to die before you die and find that there is no death. And this is one of the core intersections where psychedelics can, under the right conditions, act as training grounds for death. Not in a morbid sense, but in a spiritual one. The experience of ego death can both be blissful and ecstatic, yet at the same time produce feelings of fear and terror, perhaps paralleling the approach of actual death. In this state, we often come to the realization that we are more than our narrative selves, our bodies, and life experience. So the key is to surrender to the unfolding of it, for it to become a healing and transformative experience. Psychedelics allow us to practice the art of surrender, of giving over our fear, of trusting a greater ecosystem that we're a part of, that our essence does not disappear, but something remains. So looking back through human history, the use of psychedelics and death rituals is not a modern idea. It's several ancient precedents. In pre-Columbian Mesoamerica, the Mazatec people used psilocybin mushrooms, known as Teonanacatl, or the flesh of the gods, not just for healing, but to commune with the spirits of the dead. Death in these traditions was not an end, but a transition, a doorway. The mushrooms, or the Santos Ninas, little people, were simply portals that allowed communication across this boundary. And we also have pre-Incan culture of Chavin de Huantar that lasted for 2,000 to 3,000 years in Peru. And central to their ritual practice was an underground labyrinth in which San Pedro cactus was consumed, along with DMT-containing snuffs. Some researchers have suggested that the effects of these drugs might have been used to induce a symbolic death, and thus it acts as an initiation into adulthood, the death of child and the birth of the adult self. And the framework of this ritual also affirms the supernatural stories that they've been told all their lives as an inexplicable and dominant but very real force. And I guess equally significant and most well known is the Amazonian practice of drinking ayahuasca, which is a combination of two plants, but primarily the vine, which the brewer is named after, but ayahuasca translates as the vine of the dead, or the vine of the souls. Sometimes it's called yahe, which also means to tear apart. Interestingly, this main ingredient was originally labelled telepathy, which is harmaline. They discovered it had already been named. It's traditionally drunk in ceremonies after dark, can often involve ancestral encounters, animal transformations, but a sense of divine motherly goddess love as the almighty life force flowing through us all. Indigenous shamans describe death as a transformation of energy, and ayahuasca as a teacher that prepares our soul for that transformation. This is not just in an indigenous New World, though. In European history, we have the Eleusinian mysteries that took part in Athens in ancient Greece, which lasted from 1600 BC right up until when Christianity had become a state religion in Rome. Central to this mystery was a highly secretive psychedelic potion called the Kikion that we now believe may have been a crude form of LSD extracted from the ergot fungi that grows in rye. There's even biblical descriptions of manna that unusually detail a reference to this presentation and its process. The elusive mysteries involved the pilgrimage, purification rites, and theatrical rituals, which were associated with the myth of Persephone's abduction and descent into the underworld. Initiates spoke of seeing the afterlife and returning forever changed. The experience was said to strip away the fear of death by invoking visions and conjuring the afterlife. Many well-known philosophers went through these mysteries. Socrates, for one, got a lot of his ideas, the journey of the divine, the potential for enlightenment through initiation. Plato suggests that aspiring philosophers must have this experience if they seek the highest philosophical truths. And we believe that's also where he may have got his allegory of the cave from. Cicero, Marcus Aurelius, most of our well-known philosophers from that time went through this initiation ritual. But these traditions, they never drew a sharp line between life and death. It's coexisting with birth and life as a spectrum, closely intertwined with an ever-present ecology of spirit, with us just being one thread in the cosmic tapestry of life and death, which is seen as fluid and permeable. They are taught that dying is a process, not a moment. And psychoactive plants serve as guides along that sacred path, speaking through songs and visions. In a time where modern medicine excels at prolonging life, but struggles with the existential reality of death, psychedelics are making a powerful return to this discipline. It began at institutions like Johns Hopkins, NYU, and Imperial College London. And for over a decade now, psilocybin has been administered to patients with terminal cancer who are suffering from what they call near-death anxiety. And the results are profound. And I must give acknowledgement to Marg Ross, who is continuing this work in St. Vincent's Hospital in Melbourne. And they've now at the stage where they have results that prove this works. The overwhelming conclusive finding from these studies was best described by a headline reading, "Psychedelics may lessen fear of death and dying." And indeed, the results speak for themselves. These landmark studies are now showing that a single high-dose psilocybin session dramatically reduced depression and anxiety in dying patients. The effects lasted for months, and it wasn't just symptomatic relief. Participants described a spiritual epiphany, a sense of reuniting with the universe, or even making peace with death. The use of psychedelics in palliative care in this context is aimed at alleviating existential distress, facilitating acceptance of mortality, and enhancing the quality of life for individuals who are nearing death. And it's here that I'd like to direct people to a documentary called A New Understanding, The Science of Psilocybin. It's free on YouTube and documents the entire process of giving psilocybin to people that are near the end of their life. What psychedelics offer, it seems, is not escapism, but its antithesis, radical acceptance. Psychedelics shift the narrative from fear to meaning, from isolation to interconnectedness, from finality to transition, and from escape to embrace. Working behind the scenes is a niche but growing community of psychedelic death midwives or death doulas, and I believe we have some at the conference here this weekend, who have trained to help individuals transition over with grace. This becomes a fundamental issue that raises the rights of cognitive liberty as defined by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There are still undoubtedly deeper questions. Do psychedelics reveal something true about death, or do they merely create comforting illusions? Do psychedelics hold an inherent ethos that can make us better, more ethical people, or does the experience depend on the person? Even in contemporary times, it's unsurprising, indeed fitting, that DMT carries the nickname the spirit molecule, and its stronger 5-methoxylated cousin 5-MeO-DMT called the God molecule. These are some of the more strangely supernatural psychedelic compounds. In the late 90s, the seminal book DMT, The Spirit Molecule, came out by Rick Strassman, a psychiatrist and clinical researcher who attributed spiritual connotations to DMT by virtue of the engrossing and transcendent experience it induces. Much, however, has been written about it, including 5-MeO, which occurs naturally in the Sonoran Desert toad. Now, for the differences in these two, any DMT that's in ayahuasca is full of colour, pattern, and wonder, and intrigue, and there's a sentient form of consciousness. It's very visual, whereas 5-MeO is almost devoid of visions. It doesn't need it. It's more of a samadhi, a Brahman singularity that involves complete dissolution of all time, space, memory, everything. You just fuse into one. And there's a sense of all creation surging through one's being, which is quite often expressed through mudras, even though a person may not have awareness of them, or glossolalia, or asymmetry in the body that helps the energy flow through. So DMT is a mysterious psychedelic molecule that occurs naturally in plants, animals, and likely our own brains, and definitely our bodies. It plays an intriguing role in guiding consciousness at the moments of death, research has shown. It was hypothesized that DMT could be the neurochemical responsible for near-death experiences, which would explain the euphoric visions, the otherworldly sensations, and the encounters with the ineffable that many patients report at this threshold. More recently, a study published in 2023 compared the experiences of a person who had both DMT and a near-death experience. There is good indirect evidence to suggest that DMT is released in greater quantities at the point of death in the human brain. We have evidence from animal brains, but we don't have any direct evidence from humans, wrote David Luke. However, we can infer that this also happens. The brain at the point of death is undergoing a cascade of neurochemical changes, massive releases of serotonin and noradrenaline. In other words, DMT could indeed be seen as a psychopomp, a creature, spirit, or deity that transports the newly deceased to the afterlife. Others, though, say we know nothing about the role of endogenous DMT. And Rick Strassman gave us the pineal gland hypothesis, which stated that this brain's tiny gland, the shape of a pea, weight of 7 milligrams, although it produces melatonin, a sleep-regulating hormone, produced DMT in large enough amounts before death. This idea still remains pretty controversial, as it's very hard to prove experimentally. Dr. Eddie Fresca, he interestingly spoke about how DMT plays a key role in protecting cells from dying when oxygen is low, making room for the argument that DMT may indeed be released in large quantities during death in a last gasp attempt to keep our cells alive. These answers depend entirely on one's worldview and how open they are to having it changed. The materialists might argue that psychedelic states are chemically induced hallucinations, devoid of metaphysical reality, but we could say the same about love. Both are the result of serotonin receptor agonism and oxytocin release, but we would never reduce the sensation of love to a mere neurochemical reaction, and nor should we the psychedelic experience. The sense of being more real than real could be a product of the neurochemical reactions, but as amplifiers of our deeper subconscious, this insistent realness could also be a way of taking our own advice, as though it were coming from outside. Many who experience these states come away with a certainty that the consciousness they experience is more real than real. They speak of unity, timelessness, and the persistence of awareness beyond the body. When one has moved through the initial, often challenging phase of the identity dissolving away, such that you forget where you were born, your age, or even your name, you are just a human, alive. Yet, there appears to remain a level of consciousness when all other reference points are gone, when identity has disappeared. Something is left. More than an awareness, a memory, or a dream. The teachings of this psychedelic experience echo through the mystical traditions, from the Buddhist teachings on rebirth, Sufi visions of the divine union, Christian mysticism and its promise of eternal life. But also recognizing these parallels, Tim Leary, Ralph Metzner, and Richard Alpert, now known as Ram Dass, famously co-authored the book The Psychedelic Experience, a manual based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which was designed as a guide, the purpose of utilizing psychedelics to navigate the Maya, the cycle of death and rebirth, as set out by the Bardo Thodol, or the Tibetan Book of the Dead. The text and the experience discuss the Tibetan Book of the Dead and uses the process of death and rebirth as a metaphor for the experience itself. The psychedelic internal journey is thus likened to a metaphorical death-rebirth experience, with this text intended as a guide. He, like many others, believed that psychedelics do not create experiences, but reveal layers of reality already present, usually hidden by the filters of the everyday mind. How are we doing for time? No? That's all right. So the psychedelic journey is not one to be embarked on flippantly or without due consideration. They are indeed not for everyone. Psychedelics open the doors of perception, exposing the shadow aspects of our own true nature and challenging the worldviews that we hold to be concrete. What we experience through the doors of perception that these alkaloids open often depends on who we are when we walk through. A careless or recreational approach can lead to fear, confusion, or psychological harm. In contrast, when used with considered intention, respect for the power they hold, and with guidance for the journey or just general sage advice, they can become sacred tools and powerful catalysts of change. A simple outline of set, setting, substance, sitter, the session, and support build a framework through which we establish an approach that optimizes the experience for each individual. Set means our mindset going into the journey, our emotions and mood, psychological stability, our expectations and apprehensions. But these all have a historical context of ceremony and cultures where periods of fasting, isolation, meditation, or prayer were undertaken before a ceremony. So the indigenous context setting was traditionally carried through the healing lineage in the form of ceremony and the numerous factors that comprise it in any different culture. So for us, it just refers to our environments, the people present, lighting, music, nature, familiarity, all of that. As Stan Groff described, psychedelics are essentially non-specific consciousness amplifiers. So he believed these experiences amplified unconscious content, no matter what it might be, but including the memory of primal birth trauma, in which he built an entire framework around. But these compounds will imbue every sensory perception with intensely personal or universally profound meaning. And so they will amplify every minute aspect that you experience into something meaningful. So we do need to be discerning in how we interpret that. Yet, death is perhaps the most vulnerable moment of our lives, and to use psychedelics in the context of experiencing it or exploring it demands not only care of our physical body while we may not be in it, but care for our psyche and our soul on its journey, as well as a deep reverence for the psychedelic plants themselves. In indigenous cultures like South American shamanism, each of these plants has a relational character, like a sacred family member. Like ayahuasca is the grandmother, Wachuma cactus the grandfather, iboga the primal father. The week-old trinity relates the peyote, the deer, and maize together in a holy trinity. And this highlights our innate interconnectedness with all of life, including the unseen world. The enduring benefits of meaningfulness, spirituality, and well-being gleaned from psychedelics are also found to be significantly higher when conducted within a safe and supportive structured setting. We call this benefit enhancement. Strategies elevating acute mystical experience and a long-term sense of personal meaning and spiritual significance will be achieved through a more discerning approach. Equally important to this preparation is the integration. What happens afterwards, particularly if the psychedelic experience is traumatic, confusing, or part of an ongoing healing journey. This guided therapeutic process of helping a person to find or make meaning from their experience is a subjective one and takes time, but is only beginning to be acknowledged. So in an ever-evolving ethical and judicial landscape, psychedelics are still sadly illegal. In most parts of the world, access for dying patients is limited, despite compelling scientific support. There are efforts underway, such as the right to try laws in the US attempting to change this. Advocates argue that terminal patients should have access to all tools that ease suffering, especially those with such profound existential benefit, and they should not be made to wait for all the double-blind placebo trials to be complete when they are dying and they wish to engage with a plant that has been used by humans likely since the dawn of our species. But this is not just about law, it's about culture. We live in a society that fears death, avoids death, shuns discussions of it, even, and in doing so often makes it harder than it needs to be. As Jasmine Verdi wrote, death is one thing that binds us all. As surely as we were born, the fact that we will one day die presents itself as an inevitability for us all. Psychedelics may not be the solution for everyone, but they can be a doorway for some. They offer us an opportunity to reframe death and dying, not as an inevitable burden to be avoided, but as a sacred mystery to be embraced and as tools to inspire gratitude for our existence, our perception, our relationships, and our thoughts and emotion that bear witness to this miracle of life while we were briefly conscious of it. So where does this leave us? Psychedelics do not provide easy answers about the afterlife, unlike the various religions may have to proffer, but instead they offer something perhaps more important, a way to be with death without fear. Deep humility, a way to listen, to let go, to see beyond the illusion of separateness and acknowledge our attachments for what they were. As the poet Rainer Maria Rilke wrote, death is our friend precisely because it brings us into absolute and passionate presence with all that is here, that is natural, that is love. Through the lens of psychedelics, we're reminded that the death process is not something to dread, but something to prepare for, to honour and perhaps to understand as the final inescapable lesson. In the end, psychedelics return us not to death, but to life, back into the core of our authentic beings as humans more conscious, more compassionate, more creative, more loving, and more connected to the great mystery and web of life that surrounds us all and binds us together as one. Thank you. If anyone would like references or citation to things I've mentioned there, just come to the Australian Psychedelic stand and I can send you a note that will have a little reference list. We got time for questions? Oh, okay. I don't mind talking about it. I left school very young. When I was about 16, I picked up a copy of The Doors of Perception and read it and was like, okay, it's interesting. Just some, 60s druggy story. And then a couple of days later, I went round to a squat house and someone handed me a big glass of cactus juice. And that just started it. I was fascinated with it. For several hours, I couldn't shake the sensation that I had been here before. Even to the point where I thought, did my parents give this to me when I was young and not tell me? But it was in my memory. And I couldn't shake that sensation for so long that I deliberately pursued psychedelics for many, many years. So, yeah. Ah. Yeah. Ah, right, the toad with the 5-MeO-DMT. Yes. Did they give you... Wow, yeah, that's a pretty deep dive. Did they give you a large dose of the toad or a couple of medium-sized doses? Yeah. Do you remember the experience? Oh, really? Yes, it's very somatic. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. It is the one form of DMT that has been shown to occur endogenously in the brain, the 5-methoxylated DMT. And that is the one that is more like the dying experience than just normal DMT. Yeah, I think I have the sort of feeling it works on the energetic body. For me, it felt like it was getting underneath my nervous system and shaking out things that were blocking the flow of energy, to the point that even a couple of days later, I felt certain psychological aspects that sort of prevented or inhibited me from expressing myself were gone. And I suddenly felt I had no fear in expressing myself in certain ways in certain places. And the two seem very related. But I guess it's that idea that we hold psychological trauma in our bodies. Yeah, yeah. We do need to remember that 5-MeO-DMT from the bufo toad, Bufo alvarius toad, there is no evidence for traditional practice. For all intents and purposes, it's a modern rediscovery in the early 90s by a guy called Albert Most. And there are a couple of people that sort of went on a crusade that lived in the communities in Mexico and introduced it to people on methamphetamines and stuff to try and treat people in their local community. And then elders in that community adopted the practice, which gives the external appearance that it's traditional, but it's not. The rest are, of course. Yes. Either one. I think so for your first time, yeah. Find somebody that, you can trust, that has done it before, that knows what is involved. Because it's even the smallest gestures from someone can be sort of perceived as meaning something entirely significantly different to, something that may not have meant anything. And it's also good to have someone to take you to the park and show you interesting things and just make sure you're okay so you don't walk out in traffic or, get lost. You get a question as well? Yeah. Yeah, LSD's, essentially, it's all in the same sort of pool of similar compounds. LSD has an exception in that it activates dopamine as well as the serotonin, that all the others just activate serotonin. That's why I guess LSD keeps you up a lot longer, it sort of gives you more energy, you can sort of walk around a lot easier. It's sort of, it doesn't kind of... At the right dose, yeah, it's no less transformative than the others, definitely, yeah. Was there another question you had? Yeah. It's for people to accept their death. Like if you've been given 3 months to live and, you know, you've gone through the whole process of getting your will together and, you know, all of that sort of thing, getting your children back from overseas and, you know, preparing physically for what may happen after you die, it's extremely stressful. And what the studies are showing is that it takes away that fear of what is going to happen when I'm gone or what's going to happen to me when I cross over. It seems to just give a reassurance that there is something loving and benevolent beyond the veil that will look after that person and their family. Whether it be objectively true or not does not matter. Yeah, one more. Here we go here.
Is there any studies done with just smoking DMT alone that helps people get off methamphetamine?
Alone? Oh, just DMT by itself. Not that I know offhand in the literature, but I do know anecdotally of it working, of people, giving DMT to friends that are on meth and, it just snapping them out of it. He thought maybe it has something to do with the route of administration is the same if you're vaporizing in a glass pipe. But there's many ways to smoke DMT. You can mix it with the ayahuasca leaf and make changa, and that's a very different experience to DMT on its own. But anecdotally there is a lot of evidence that works. And I think it's all kind of the same process. It's giving you a sense of self-love and self-respect, and you sort of reflect on what you've been doing to yourself and think, well, why? You know, you suddenly feel value for yourself, and you can feel the value that others have that love you, and it just shifts your sort of perspective of yourself so that you tend to stop self-destructive behaviors because you develop a sort of new relationship to yourself. But I'll have a look through the literature and see if there's a study at the moment in Sydney using ketamine for methamphetamine addiction. Sorry? Oh, it's another drug altogether. Yeah, it's considered psychedelic, even though it's an anesthetic. It does have profound visionary properties. Yeah, so people, do consider it psychedelic. It's used a lot to treat depression, but now it's been tried for methamphetamine addiction. Yeah. Well, I wouldn't call them hallucinations because you know what you're seeing isn't real. You know you're tripping. You know it's a vision that's a result of the trip. And if you see something negative or something scary, it's usually either, people say there's no such thing as a bad trip, but I think there is. If you don't prepare your situation properly, or you're running down the street naked and get arrested, then you're going to have a bad trip. It's got nothing to do with your set and setting or your intentions or any of that. But if you set everything up properly and, you've got a good set and a safe setting and a good intention going in, those sort of scary visions can very easily be translated into something relatable, and quite often your sense of fear can be attenuated to the extent where you're very accepting of it. You go, okay, big scary monster. What do you mean? There's no reason you can't question the things you're seeing, because it's sort of reflective amplification of your own mind anyway. So if you're seeing some big scary monster, it's something from deep inside your psyche. So there's no reason you can't talk to it and say, what do you mean? Where do you come from? What do you have to teach me? And I think that works in my experience. Yeah.
Because I've done many psilocybin trips, and it does open your mind and your perception to the spirit world as well. And you are absolutely right in saying ask the question,
Yeah.
because then it gives that authority back to you. I have encountered ancestors in my journeys, and they are written down. I don't have psilocybin to all of this kind of placement meditation, and they are there. So you find that you find either ancestral or other traveling companions that will be with you on a regular basis and become incredibly protectors and guides of who are looking after you and share the journeys with you in your own personal transformation.
Yeah, also the plants themselves, like ayahuasca has a very distinct voice. It's this powerful feminine voice that will just tell you exactly what you need to hear. You know, it will say, be kinder to your mum, or something, you know, something it's relevant but profoundly meaningful. It speaks, and you can speak back to it and begin a dialogue. Things like cactus. I remember when I first had cactus, I just had this feeling of my grandfather over the back of my shoulder, just watching me, just making sure I was safe. It's sort of, cactus has a very masculine sort of feel to it. Don't know why, but it fits the the plant's very masculine, yeah. But it's interesting to experience these things and then later find out that, that's how the indigenous people see it as well. When you've experienced it yourself without even knowing that. We got any other questions? Yeah, go for it.
What are your thoughts on people that use it purely recreational with alcohol, like party scenes?
There's nothing wrong with it. I mean, people use different substances in different ways, all the time. Most people who do that, I find, eventually grow out of it and start to approach psychedelics a little bit more seriously with conscious intent. But yeah, like you go to festivals and people are on bloody everything, mixing it like a big bowl, just throwing in coke and ketamine and LSD and just, for a party. And I mean, recreation is recreating. It's fun. So fun can be healing itself as well. So it doesn't need to be necessarily shunned. It's just a different form of, finding things out. Okay, how are we going? Yeah.
Are you saying that mostly people will be aware that that's
Sorry, say it again?
You said that most people are aware that what they see in the
Yeah, I think so, unless you get to a really high dose where, you really need someone to look after you, or, you've had something like DMT and forgotten that you smoked DMT, which can happen. But it's still, I'm sort of comparing it to something like Datura that Liam mentioned yesterday, whereas that's a plant that you really shouldn't touch, where, you think you're at the beach and you'll go to swim in the water, but you're actually in traffic downtown CBD. It's not like that. I mean, that's true hallucination, like say a person in psychosis. Whereas the visions of psychedelics have a sort of a characteristic that you can kind of tell, even if you've forgotten you smoked DMT, you can kind of tell, right, yeah, these are DMT visions.
So somebody who does tend to have experiences that completely out of reality and very real is the ones that
Yeah, I would not advise for that person to just jump into psychedelics without doing a lot of research and having some assistance and talking to people that know a lot about their condition and the pharmacology of psychedelics. Oh, okay. Oh, cool. Yeah.
therefore not everyone that was aware that it was real.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I mean, it's means about real as being like, it's not necessarily what you see you're interpreting as being real and objective, but the messages and the sensations that you experience are emotions, and so they're as real as any other emotion that we feel, any other lesson we learn or understand. That's real. So yeah, I guess it's just the approach. But that's good that you had a good supportive, experience there. Yep. Yeah. Yep. Everyone good? Thank you very much. Really appreciate your time.